What is going on, everybody? It is the Icebreaker here, back with another video. Judging by the title of this, it is that time of year again. We are getting into our season previews for this upcoming 2024-2025 NHL season. And for today's video, we are starting things off with the Pacific Division. I'm giving you guys my standings predictions for the Pacific. Like we've done this pretty much every year, the past 2-3 seasons, I believe, or 2-3 off seasons. So yeah, again, if you guys have seen these videos before, you know the drill. I'm ranking them in descending order from 8 to 1, who I believe to be the worst in the division, to who I believe is going to win the division for this upcoming season. Maybe some hot takes for this division, in my opinion, more so towards the bottom of the division, but let's talk about it right away. We'll get into it, starting with 8th in the Pacific being the worst team. So kicking things off, the team that I believe is going to be the worst in the Pacific Division. Yes, you see it here correctly. I have the Calgary Flames, 25-51-6 record for only 56 points. And I do believe they're going to bottom out and be the worst team in the NHL this upcoming season. Various reasons as to why. I just think they're a rebuilding team. They're definitely trending in the wrong direction. So let's dissect the team a little bit more here. So like I mentioned, they kind of been selling assets since the month of March last season. At the trade deadline, they got rid of some of their better defensemen, Chris Tanev, Noah Hanifin. They also traded Jacob Markstrom in the offseason to the New Jersey Devils. So their starting goaltender is now gone. Also, got rid of a couple of other guys, one being Andrew Mangiapane, who they traded to the Capitals, Oliver Shillington, more of a third pair defenseman, but he's now gone to the Colorado Avalanche. The entire team is a little bit depleted. They're not as deep as they once were. And I definitely think there's some reason to believe that this Flames team is going to be significantly worse than last season. I think a lot of people predict them to be among the worst teams in the NHL. Just kind of looking at how their forward lineups look. Credit to Daily Faceoff for this. But yeah, these are their forward lines as of right now. Not a huge fan of what they got going on at the moment. I mean, I don't know why they have Kadri slated as their third line center. He's clearly their best player. He's coming off a 75-point season. I'm not sure if he's quite going to have that type of production, especially with the talent around him definitely depleted, in comparison to last year. Although not as much, not that much worse forward-wise. I think they're still kind of sort of dressing the same exact team up front. But I definitely do think that there's going to be some regression with certain guys on this team. I look at Blake Coleman, for example, 30 goals last year. I don't envision that for him this upcoming season. Michael Backlund's fine, but as more of a third-line center, he's coming off, I believe, 39 points. Jonathan Huberdeau has just not looked like himself since coming over from the Panthers. And unless he really bounces back this season and gets back to at least somewhat of what he was with the Panthers, I think he's kind of just sort of proved to everyone that he is what he is at this point. He's nothing more than just a 50-point second liner, poor man's Matt Zuccarello is the best way I can describe it, to be honest. But they do have some young guys, sort of. I mean, Connor Zary being their most notable guy. He's going to get a ton of opportunity on that top six, although I kind of view him more as a third liner, but we'll see if he can elevate his play a little bit. Sharon Govich is coming off a great season. He had over 30 goals last year. I can see him having a similar season. Yeah, I look more at like Kadri and Kuzmenko. They had some chemistry last season. I think they could connect again this year and be among the better players on the Flames roster. And they have Pospisil also centering or a part of that line with them as well on the wing. I'm not really sure if he's a legit top six forward, but they like that lineup together with those three guys. So, whatever works. The fourth line, I know they brought in Ryan Lomberg, but, he is what he is. He's a fourth liner. That fourth line is going to give you little to no offense. It's fairly certain. I'm fairly certain of that. And Anthony Mantha, I think he has the capabilities of being still a 25 to 30 goal scorer. I mean, if he's healthy, he definitely has been that guy in the past, so that is some scoring punch that the Flames did add, which is a good sign for them. But overall, this forward group, I'm not entirely moved by it. I definitely don't think it's a playoff caliber forward group, especially where the team is going. I don't envision a lot of guys had great seasons. I just don't think they can replicate it. Looking at them on defense, they got significantly weaker, like I mentioned, trading guys like Hanifin and Tanev. And Mackenzie Weegar is still great. He's coming off a 20-goal season, like over 50 points. Again, another guy that had a career season. Not sure he can replicate that. And Anderson's actually coming off quite a bit of a disappointing one. Didn't even hit 40 points. I feel like he is their main offensive guy. But yeah, they're relying on Kevin Bale, their ball, to be their top four defenseman. I just don't see him as that caliber of defense. As of right now, the blue line's not looking so hot. And that's the reason why I think the goaltending is going to struggle as well, especially with Markstrom gone. Dustin Wolf, the rookie goaltender, is going to be probably taking over as the starter. he is a promising young prospect, and I think he's going to have a really solid NHL career. But just given the blue line in front of him, I could see him struggling a little bit in his first season. I mean, he wasn't particularly great in the games he played last year, where the team was obviously a lot better, and I think they're most definitely going to be a lot worse this upcoming season. So I do expect the goaltending not to be amazing. I don't think it's going to be able to, Wolf is not going to be able to save this Flames team from being one of the worst teams. And Dan Vladar is a career backup goalie who hasn't really found consistency at the NHL level at all over the course of his career. So I definitely envision the goaltending to struggle quite a bit. But overall, I look at this team, and for them to be anywhere close to a playoff spot, I do think quite a lot has to go right. Like I said, Huberdeau needs to return to his peak form. Wolf has to absolutely carry that lackluster blue line that he has in front of him. Guys like Blake Coleman need to replicate the season that he had with 30 goals. Kadri needs to, return to that 75 plus point player and be a true number one center. I personally view him as a second line center, so I have him around the 60-point range. Kind of more so what he has been over the majority of his career. Well, even in Toronto, he was never that productive, but I think he's done enough to, cement himself as obviously the best player on the Flames, but just in comparison to the rest of the league, I just don't think he's has the ceiling to be a perennial first line center year in and year out. So yeah, I think a lot has to go right. I think they're a rebuilding team. They're tearing it down. Not overly confident in the forward group as a whole. Does lack a bit of skill and high-end talent, in my opinion. Again, blue line's not great. Goaltending still inexperienced. I think this Flames team's going to struggle. I think they're going to be a lot worse than people think. But I think this is what they kind of have to do. I could just see a world where they can totally bottom out and give themselves the best opportunity to get a number one pick and start moving in the right direction and continue to, really grasp that rebuild and, do what they needed to be doing for the last couple of seasons, because they've been kind of like hovering around mediocrity. And I think now they're finally moving in a good direction. Obviously, they're going to struggle for the next couple of seasons, but I think this is where they should be. They should be among the worst teams in the league. But I'm going to go hot take, say they are the worst team in the league, and as a result, the worst team in the Pacific. Coming in at 7th in the Pacific Division, of course, in my opinion, I got the San Jose Sharks with a 24-48-10 record for 58 points. This is a team that a lot of people are expecting to be the worst team in the league, and as a result, the worst team in the Pacific. But look, I'm looking at their lineup, and I actually can see, a scenario where they're not the worst team in this division. I like what they did in the offseason, but let's break them down right now. So obviously having the Sharks at 58 points, I'm still not fully confident that they're going to be anywhere close to a playoff spot. They're still clearly a rebuilding team, but given their offseason and, the last couple of drafts, it definitely seems like their core is slowly coming together. Big part of that is obviously drafting Macklin Celebrini with that top pick. I could see a world where he dominates right away. He'll be in the running for the Calder Trophy. If not, he's probably the front runner for it, given that, he has such a high ceiling. He was a number one pick. I think a lot of people are expecting him to be in that conversation, if not win the damn thing. But yeah, I really like the additions they made in terms of the veterans, adding Tyler Toffoli, who at his best can be a 30-plus goal scorer. And I think given that he'll be playing definitely top 6 minutes, most likely in a top-line role, he's in line to probably be the team's leading scorer. So I got him 36 goals, over 60 points. He's been that type of guy in the past. We've seen how he can play. I mean, he had some stretches in Vancouver when he was there briefly. He was really good. With Montreal, he was fairly consistent in his year and a half there as well. With Calgary, he had a career season a couple of years back. With the Devils, he was good. Just been a consistent guy throughout his entire career. Every team he's played for, he's been a very welcomed addition to those teams. So I think he's going to be, once again, a welcomed addition to this Sharks team that definitely needs some of that veteran leadership. But in terms of the rest of their forward group, I'm not going to lie to you guys. This is far from the worst forward group I've seen. I think there's a lot of potential for the Sharks to be able to score quite a bit more goals than they did in years past. Of course, Macklin Celebrini is going to be a big part of that, but other guys like William Eklund coming off a very solid 45-point season, a former lottery pick, I think he could potentially take another step forward, be north of 50 points. Will Smith, also in his rookie season, who could also be in the running for the Calder Trophy. He's a guy with like elite top line potential, and I think as soon as this season can make an immediate impact and be, a top line contributor right out of the gate. I could also see him playing with Celebrini on the top line. Maybe you move Zetterlund down because Zetterlund's not bad for a middle sixer, but I think Will Smith's ceiling is higher and maybe would be benefited more to play on the top line. But looking at the rest of the team, Granlund's coming off a great season. He's fit well as the number 2 center. Logan Couture, I don't know if he's coming back from injury. If he is, you can expect him to, as the captain of the team, to come back, and he's still capable of being at the very least, I think he could be a 20 goal, 40, 45, 50 point guy. So that's another guy that we can look into and saying, okay, well, he's definitely going to help the Sharks' chances to be a much more prolific offensive team than they have been. And even the depth guys that they got, Gaudreau, Dellandrea on the fourth line, I think is fine. Wenberg's a very decent third line center. So overall, the forward group has a ton of potential. Big reason why I thought they were better than the Flames as well, because I just think this team, I feel like there's more skill and more potential for them to score a lot more goals. And I don't know, I feel like there's something brewing for San Jose. I don't think they're going to be at all the worst team in the league. I mean, I guess I have them pretty close with Calgary, but at the same time, I could see a world where they're a lot better than people think. I could definitely envision them still being potentially even like a 60 to 65 point team. That would not surprise me in the slightest. But then you look at their defense, and this is where things get a little bit dicey. This is one of the worst decors in the entire NHL. I know they did their best to add some veteran leadership. They brought in Cody Ceci recently, but he's not a top pair defenseman. If he projects there, I think that's a bit of a concern. Mario Ferraro is going to be their number one guy, but going to play a ton of minutes, but I don't think he's a number one defenseman. You can argue at best he's probably a second pair guy, but yeah, he's be on the ice for a lot of goals, and the D's definitely going to struggle. Also added Jake Wallman, who I thought had some stints. With the stint in Detroit, he had some solid moments. Especially, he was definitely a very solid defensive presence for Mo Seider on that top pair, and I thought that they played really well together. But he's coming over to San Jose. He doesn't really have anybody to play with to that caliber, so I definitely think he's going to struggle a little bit more. Overall, I'm not a huge fan of this blue line. It's among the worst in the league. But then you look at the goaltending. The goaltending is far from the worst. Honestly, Mackenzie Blackwood, all things considered, with how bad the team was, I mean, they had 47 points last year. I thought Blackwood actually played pretty decent, and in some ways, he kind of resurrected his career from being, labeled as a guy who was never going to pan out with the Devils and potentially being a bust. I think he's turned out fine, and I think in a backup role, he can be a very serviceable goaltender. But obviously, getting Yaroslav Askarov, who's one of the top goaltending prospects in the league, a couple days ago, they acquired him from the Nashville Predators. He has starter potential. He has franchise goaltender potential. And as soon as next season, I think with the Sharks, he's definitely going to get that opportunity to start on the NHL roster there for the Sharks. And, as soon as early on in the season, he could absolutely steal the starter's role and be phenomenal. So I think goaltending is much better. The offense is much better. The Sharks are definitely better than they were last season, that's for sure. So overall, although I don't think the Sharks are going to be anywhere close to a playoff spot, and they're going to have a few years of struggles before they finally get to, Stanley Cup contention, I think for Sharks fans this season, just enjoy the season. You got an exciting young core, a lot of great players coming out, going to play their first and second years in the league. It's going to be a fun time for the Sharks, this new era. They're definitely moving in a proper direction now, rebuilding the team. Their core is looking great, or at least it has the potential to be one of the better cores in the NHL. So the Sharks, they're not ready to be a playoff team yet, but they're definitely moving in the right direction. But as of right now, I got them 7th in the Pacific. Coming in at number 6 in the Pacific, in my opinion, this I don't think should surprise anybody. I feel like a lot of people have this team ranked 6th pretty safely in that division. I got the Anaheim Ducks, but getting significantly better from last season. 30 wins, 44 losses, 8 overtime losses for 68 points. Another team that's super young, but I believe they're going to move in the right direction, and I think they have the potential to be even a lot better than people think. So with this 9-point improvement, because they had 59 points last year, I am expecting the Ducks to take another step forward. Obviously, they're still rebuilding, but I am expecting significant improvement there. And I think if one or multiple pieces take a superstar leap, they could be in position to potentially be a lot more competitive. I'm not saying that they'll be competing for a playoff spot necessarily, but a big reason why they were so bad last year is because this team was absolutely riddled with injury. I know a lot of Ducks fans like to get defensive for this team, but I absolutely agree that if these guys were healthier, this young core was healthier, a lot of their players, they would have been significantly better and definitely a lot more competitive. So I think there's a world where I could even be sleeping on them a little bit, and I can definitely envision them potentially being a 70 to 75 point team. I don't think that's a hot take because I really like the way this core is being constructed. Now, looking at this Ducks forward group to start things off here for this Ducks lineup, I got to tell you, I've definitely seen way worse forward groups for the Anaheim Ducks in recent memory. And just with the young guys that they're bringing in, Cutter Gauthier being the most notable guy, who by the way, I think is a stud. I think he's going to be a fantastic player in the NHL. And if he's projected to play with guys like Zegras and Frank Vatrano, who's coming off an amazing, like, Vatrano had like 37 goals last year, just an incredible year. I'm not sure he replicates that, but anyway, he's still, going to be one of the better goal scorers on the team. If he is projected to play with a guy like Zegras, who, obviously can bounce back, was injury riddled last year, just didn't look like himself. I expect him to bounce back, at least get back to the 65-ish point player that he was. Maybe he can take another step, given that the team around him looks to be much better than it has been in years past. But if there's chemistry there, I could see a world where, the Ducks are definitely going to be elevated offensively, be a lot more of a relevant offensive team than they have been. Assuming Zegras is still on the team and he re-signs, because he's been in the rumor mill. I'm not sure if he's fitting in their plans long term, because when they drafted Leo Carlsson, right now he's projected to be their number one center for the future. Troy Terry, I think, is capable of way more than he provided last season. Mason McTavish is another guy, when he was healthy, very solid. I think he might be a future captain for this Ducks team, and a pretty good one at that. I definitely think he has like 30 goal upside. And I think I have him scoring roughly around 30 goals and over 60 points. I just think that he has the makings to be, like, at the very least, a quality second line center, kind of like maybe like a Ryan Kessler type of build, in my opinion. And the depth is not so bad. Robbie Fabry's a low risk, high reward, even though he's been riddled with injury basically his entire career in Detroit. The change of scenery in Anaheim, hopefully he stays healthy. He can have a solid year. Ryan Strom's still pretty solid. Fourth line's decent too. So this forward group is looking a lot better than it has been. The defense, I definitely think, is significantly better with Olen Zellweger coming in. Has top line potential for sure. Probably going to be quarterback in the top unit, unless, Fowler's still, taking minutes away, which is fine. He's a veteran. He's, been there, done that. He's fairly solid offensively. Pavel Mitkov, top 4 guy, had a really underrated rookie season. And I think this next year he could take potentially even another step forward and solidify himself as maybe potentially even, the best defenseman on this Ducks team as soon as next season. He definitely will be in that conversation. Radko Gudas, not bad. Dumoulin added some depth on that third pair, I think is really solid. I'm looking at the D. I don't think it's that bad either. I definitely think there's potential for it to improve. And then you look at the goaltending, Gibson, Lucas Dostal is probably going to be taking over as the starter, where Gibson kind of transitions more into the backup. Maybe he gets dealt at some point over the next year or so. But look, overall, this Ducks team, it looks pretty solid. I think there's potential for it to be a lot better than it has been in years past. And yeah, another team that's getting better, moving in the right direction. So we'll see what happens. And I just think internally that there's a lot of guys on this roster that are going to take massive steps forward. I look at Leo Carlsson, kind of injury riddled, but when he was healthy, he had moments where he was playing fantastic. And I think he's going to take another step forward. I could see a world where he flirts with 60 points. Same can be said with McTavish. Like I said before, I think he gets over 60. I think Zegras can maybe push for 70 points. If he's on the team still, probably going to lead the team in scoring and have an amazing bounce back here. Terry's capable of 60 to 70 points even potentially. So yeah, the offense is definitely going to be rolling. Like I said, the Ducks are definitely moving in the right direction. Don't think they're a playoff team just yet. Probably on all likelihood still probably bottom 5 in the NHL. I have them 29th in the league, so I guess the 4th worst team. I have them here, but yeah, I think the core is ready to take another step forward, and in a couple of years' time, they will be back in the playoffs, ready to compete. Now we're kind of getting into the teams that I think are kind of going to be in the hunt for a playoff spot, but ultimately I do not have this next team making the playoffs. Coming in at 5 in the Pacific, in my opinion, I got the Seattle Kraken, having a little bit of a better season from last season, but still 38, 33, and 11 for 87 points. Not going to be enough to make the playoffs. To me, the Seattle Kraken are probably among the weirdest teams to judge, because I can absolutely see a scenario where they're top 4, maybe even top 3 in the Pacific, and they find themselves bouncing back completely and back into the playoffs. But to me, I look at this roster, and to me, they just scream a team that's doesn't really have a clear-cut direction. They're kind of the definition of a mediocre hockey team. Like, they're not a bad team by any means, but there's not a lot of areas of their team that I look at and say, wow, that's going to be the reason that they make the playoffs. But we'll dissect their roster a bit here. Starting with their forward group here, I look at it, I don't think it's bad. Like, it's decent. Like, you can get by with it. But my issue with it is they kind of lack that high-end, top-end talent. Unless a guy like Matty Beniers, who's coming off a very disappointing sophomore year, only 15 goals, 37 points, to be the guy who is projected to be the number one center, 37 points is pretty awful. No disrespect, but if we're calling a spade, that's just not going to cut it for a number one center. So you expect him to bounce back. I think he will. I think I predicted him to get roughly 60 points, kind of get back to where he was in his rookie season, maybe do a little bit better. I think in his third year, he is going to take off a little bit and like cement himself at the very least as a legit top six forward. Jared McCann's another guy who could easily see score 30 plus goals. He has in each of the last couple of years with the Seattle Kraken. The rest of the lineup, like, it's decent. There's a lot of guys here who I kind of see, like, this is how I describe them. I see a lot of second lines here, but I don't see it like a surefire top line on this team. But there's a lot of guys who are capable of scoring anywhere between 40 to 55 points, right? Like Eberle, we know he can do that. We know Burakovsky, if he's healthy, he has the capability of being roughly a 45, 50 point guy. Bjorkstrand had well over 50 points this last season, and I think he'll be around the same as well. Even Jaden Schwartz, I mean, if he's healthy, there's potential for him to, be at least a 40-point guy. Like, there's a lot of solid offensive guys. I don't know why Shane Wright is projected on their fourth line. I think just don't even bother having him play in the NHL. If he's projected there, I would probably move down Yanni Gourde, who is a good third-line guy. But, yeah, Shane Wright needs to be the top 9 at the very least if he is going to make the team full-time, which I expect he will, because he's a solid prospect. He's going to be a good NHL player. They need to get him more minutes, obviously. If he started the season with the Seattle Kraken as the fourth-line center, fire Dan Bylsma right away. Like, I don't even want to see him coaching the team. But I guess it doesn't really make that much sense as to why they threw all that money in that term at Chandler Stevenson. Maybe it's just that for insurance in case Shane Wright they don't think is ready to be like to take on like a top 6 role, and maybe that is the case, but I just don't agree with him playing on the fourth line if he's projected there. But yeah, even so, Chandler Stevenson's a solid guy. He could be a fairly productive second line center, get you around 50-ish points like he did last season. So I'm not mad at it. I just, in ways, it's kind of questionable. The same thing can be said for their D pairing. Like, I don't think Montour was a guy that they necessarily needed, but still, I mean, he's capable of giving you decent offensive numbers. He was great with Florida, a big part of their Stanley Cup championship. But Vince Dunn is clearly still their best defenseman. I think if he's healthy, he's easily a 60-point guy, going to be leading their blue liner in points. And they have a lot of really solid, just like depth defensive guys, Adam Larson, Jimmy Alexiak, to complete their top 4. But yeah, I'm also fairly concerned with their goaltending because Joey Daccord, as good as he was last season, again, goaltending, one of the more volatile positions in the NHL, and especially for a guy like Daccord, who's still relatively unproven at the NHL level. You never know how he's going to be playing year in and year out. And if he experiences slight regression and a guy like Philip Grubauer doesn't be much better than he was last season, that's going to be a cause for concern. And that's a big reason why I don't think they're still quite at the playoff line quite yet, because I still think the goaltending is a huge question mark. I think that's pretty not a hot take at all to say. I just think that the goaltending needs to be better. And again, I'm not fully confident that Daccord is going to be an NHL starting caliber goaltender. I just, there's a lot of reasons to believe that he could regress a little bit. And then again, the forward group, just not enough top end talent. I think that they need to definitely greatly improve their offense for them to be in the mix for a playoff spot. I mean, I think they will be in the mix, but there's just other teams, especially in this Pacific Division, that I like a little bit better. It's really no disrespect to them. I'm not sure where this team fits in regards to where they stand in the Western Conference. It's not a particularly young team. They got a lot of veterans and, guys that can contribute a little bit now. But when I look at the rest of the West, especially the rest of this division, there's too many question marks than answers for this team. That's why I'm kind of on the fence of them making the playoffs. Like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if they got in, but ultimately I do have them falling short of the postseason. Getting into my top 4 for the Pacific Division, in fourth, I got the Los Angeles Kings, 43-30-9 record for 95 points. I know a lot of people are kind of low in the Kings this upcoming season. I think a lot of people, I've seen them have them kind of in the hunt for playoffs, but I've heard some people say that they might not even make the playoffs. I'm not quite there with them. I still think, all things considered, it's still a relatively solid lineup. And although I don't think they're a dominant team, I don't know what this team could do come playoff time. I still think they're good enough to, at the very least, be a wild card team. So like I said, with 95 points, I do have them 7th in the West as the first wild card in the Western Conference for the 2025 playoffs. But I am in agreement with most people. This is still a solid team, but look, the offseason wasn't the greatest, and I definitely don't view them as any better as they were last season. Now, having said that, I don't think they're significantly worse either. They're kind of sort of bringing back, for the most part, the same team, just with a couple of minor additions that I don't think are going to make a significant negative impact to completely take them out of the playoffs. So that's kind of where I'm at with them. But yes, this team is definitely far from a lock to make the playoffs because, look, you look at this roster, they've been to the playoffs each last 3 seasons, and every single time, getting destroyed, well, not destroyed, but losing to the Edmonton Oilers 3 years in a row in the first round. I mean, the first time they were there, they lost in 7 and then 6. And this past playoffs, you could say they got destroyed. They lost in 5 games. They didn't really stand a chance. As we dissect the roster here, I do think overall this is a good team, but are they a great team? That's where I'm a little bit iffy on. But overall, their forward group, I think, is pretty solid, especially their top 6. I mean, maybe not the most elite of top 6s, but I definitely think it gets by. I mean, with Kopitar leading the way, he's still one of the better centers in the league. Although he is on the wrong side of 30 and probably in his mid-30s now, maybe his play, declines a little bit, but I still think that he is of a first-line caliber of center. Adrian Kempe's coming off an amazing season. I see no reason why he wouldn't replicate that, be someone who could put up 70-plus points. He's pretty much in the prime of his career. And then Quinton Byfield, who will probably transition into that number 1 center for the future, had a breakout season with 55 points this past season. I have him scoring close to 70. I really think that he has that ceiling to be, if not a franchise center, at least elite top line center once he, eventually transitions there. He definitely has the ceiling to be one of the better players in the league, of course. And then the second line of Trevor Moore, Philip Deneau, Kevin Fiala, solid second line. It's, been together for a while, and I think they have a ton of chemistry, especially Deneau and Trevor Moore. And Fiala in his own right is capable of being an elite offensive player. He's had some very productive seasons since coming over from the Kings, even though this past season was somewhat of a dip, but I still think he should be hovering around the 70, 75-ish, maybe even get to over a point per game. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. But then looking at the bottom 6, I mean, it's not the worst. I think a lot has to go right for a guy like Alex Turcotte if he is projected to be the third line center. Hasn't really panned out quite yet, so hopefully at least he could kind of resurrect his career in some way and at least contribute a little bit in the top 6 and cement himself at the very least as an NHL caliber forward. I do like the Warren Foegele addition. I know they lost Arvidsson, but he was just riddled with injury, and I think Warren Foegele is probably going to be more available for them. He's a guy that is capable of scoring roughly 40 points and right around 20 goals, so I don't mind that addition for the third line. I think it's a very solid one, and I got really nothing else to say about the rest of their bottom 6. I mean, Louis Jeannot, Laferriere, they're kind of are what they are at this point. But Arthur Kaliyev, I think it's a huge insult to his abilities that the fact that he's being projected on the fourth line. I know he's had some issues, especially this past season just wasn't the greatest year, but I still think he has a solid ceiling to be a decent goal scorer and at least give him some middle 6 time. I don't think it's good for his game if he's going to be dressed on the fourth line with Trevor Lewis and Tanner Jeannot. He's obviously not going to produce with those guys, so maybe he's looking for a change of scenery because I don't like that he's on the fourth line. If he is indeed projected there, again, these are just projections. We don't know how the lineups are going to look, but I'm not liking what I see in terms of that. But hopefully he gets up the lineup, or they decide to just move on from him because he definitely deserves a way better than that. In terms of their defense, I know a lot of people didn't like what they did to the blue line. Joel Edmondson is all right for a third pair. I don't think it doesn't move the needle necessarily, but it's not a negative. I wouldn't call it necessarily a negative. I think Gavrikov is fine, although he's had his moments where he hasn't looked the greatest. Anderson, Drew Doughty's a fine top pair. Brant Clark's one of the top prospects in terms of defensemen, so I think he can come in and definitely solidify himself as a top 4 guy. So overall, this defense, I don't think it's as bad as people think. I definitely think it's been one of their stronger suits over the last few years, so I'm not totally upset with it. I still think that it's a fine defense, and overall, this is a fine team. In terms of their goaltending, I actually think in some ways you could say it got better. I know a lot of people did not like that they traded Pierre-Luc Dubois for Darcy Kemper, who's coming off a miserable season with the Capitals. I think everyone can agree on that. but I still think he has potential to be a solid starting goaltender. I mean, he was the starting goaltender when the Avalanche won the damn cup a couple of years ago. He could still be decent. Like, I don't think this is going to be I don't think it's going to age poorly for them, especially with David Riddick. You get stability there. Big save, Dave. He's had moments where he's played really well. He kind of took over the starter role down the stretch last season when Cam Talbot kind of started to struggle after that hot start he had to start the year. So I think you can run a tandem with these two and get by. So, like, the goaltending, although it's not the best, and yes, it could be a bit shaky, there could be some concerns there. I don't necessarily view it as it being like the utmost concerning, part of their team. I just think overall the team looks solid enough to compete for a playoff spot, and ultimately I still think they're good enough to get it. Now, having said that, do I think they're a Stanley Cup contender? No, not even close. I don't think they're going to be competing for a Stanley Cup championship. And yes, maybe they do fall the playoff spot. I guess that wouldn't surprise me that much. But at the same time, I still think this team's good enough to compete. I think they're good enough to make the playoffs. Maybe with their core of Doughty and Kopitar, where people claim that they rely on them so much. And if those guys are getting older, maybe they'll have to transition to a couple of retooling years. I could see that being a possible scenario. But ultimately, I still think this team overall is good enough to make the playoffs, and that's why I have them fourth in the Pacific. Getting into the top three here, just by default, because I don't think they're any worse than the teams below them, but they're definitely not a top two team in this division as currently constructed. But I got the Vegas Golden Knights 46-29-7 for 99 points. Going to have another solid season and get back into the playoffs. Now, I know the Golden Knights did not have the greatest offseason. I wasn't a huge fan of, the departures they made. They got rid of Logan Thompson via trade to the Capitals. That's kind of a weird one for me because he was sort of still a young goaltender that had potential to be a decent starter. But if they thought they saw concerns with his game, I mean, I definitely did. I thought he looked completely awful against the Dallas Stars in the first round. Virtually every goal he let in were stinkers. Let's be honest. If the fact that they traded him just tells me that they had little to no confidence in him ever becoming the goaltender that they thought he would become. So it's a bit of a risk now. You bring in Ilya Samsonov and Akira Schmid to be presumably fighting for the backup role to Aiden Hill. Obviously, you got to give Hill his respect for being the starter when the Golden Knights won the Cup a couple years back. But yeah, that's a bit of a weird one. You could argue that they downgrade a bit in goal, losing obviously Jonathan Marchessault, who gave you over 40 goals, and Chandler Stevenson, who was a steady middle six center. Definitely hurts compared to the guys that they brought in. So looking at their forward group, there's one thing that I noticed right out the gate, and that is their center depth. This is one of the deepest center cores in the entire NHL, arguably the deepest. The fact that Nicolas Roy is your fourth line center, a guy who is capable of putting up roughly 40 points like he did this past season, I think it's absolutely fantastic. William Karlsson on your third line is easily a number two center. Thomas Hertl, when he's on his game, has the potential to be kind of a fringe first line center, be a guy who can get you 60 to 70 points. And I think he's going to have an amazing season his first full year with Vegas. And then, of course, Jack Eichel, who's a franchise centerman, or at the very least a high elite centerman who is capable of being a point per game plus when he's fully healthy. But then you look at the wing depth, and that's kind of where the team crumbles a little bit. But the reason why I still think they're going to be a good team and be a playoff team is because I feel like the center depth is so good and those centers are so good that those guys are capable of driving lines and just elevating the play of the players around them. So guys like Ivan Barbashev, for example, had chemistry with Jack Eichel. I think he's going to be fine. Mark Stone's obviously an elite winger, is probably obviously their best winger. So obviously it doesn't matter who he plays with, he's going to get his. And if he's healthy, which is always a huge question mark for Mark Stone, it seems like every year he always misses like at least half the season. But if he's healthy, he's going to be just fine. Guy like Victor Olofsson coming off a very disappointing season, but reuniting with Jack Eichel, I could see a world where he maybe gets back to 20 to 25 goals. Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. He still has that upside, even though he's already like 29 years old, which he hasn't even been in the league for that long, but I guess he was a bit of a late bloomer. Other guys, Alexander Holtz is a guy they're taking a huge flyer on. I mean, he has still pretty young with a ton of like raw skill, high-end potential that he just never fully realized with the Devils. So he could low-key be a hidden gem for Vegas. Look, I still think that the wingers can get by just given how amazing their center depth is. I think the team will score a fair amount of goals. I don't think yes, they're probably going to take a step back offensively, especially losing a 40-goal guy in March. So like that's key. Like we can't ignore that, right? But I still think they'll get by offensively. They have a really, solid enough talent up front. I don't need to spend too much on the defense. I mean, this is probably the deepest D-core in the entire NHL, especially after acquiring Noah Hanifin, who is a surefire top pair blue liner, with Pietrangelo, who still, I mean, maybe he lost a step a bit, but I still think he is, at the very least, a very, very respectable top four defenseman. McNabb, Shea Theodore, when healthy, one of the best in the league, most underrated blue liner, in my opinion, still. Whitecloud Hague, very good, solid third pair. It's been that way for years now. And like I mentioned, the goaltending, maybe there's a bit of concerns, but Ilya Samsonov has shown signs where he can be, in stints, can be a very solid goaltender, and especially in a backup role to Aiden Hill, or it's probably going to be more of a tandem. I think, just ride with the hot hand, but I definitely think overall, like, they have options back there, and I think any of those guys can show up when it matters most and really give them solid to high quality goaltending. So overall, this is a very solid Vegas Golden Knights lineup. Again, they're not really any better than last season, similar to the Kings, but there's reason to believe that they're not that much worse either, especially with how amazing they have it on the blue line. And in terms of their center depth, I think the rest of the roster can kind of cancel itself out. Like, I think they'll be fine. That's all I'm going to say. And because of the elite core that they still possess, like I mentioned with the blue line and their center depth most specifically, I still think this team has the potential to contend for another Stanley Cup. I don't know if they're going to win another one, but I definitely think, just given how talented their high-end talent is, they'll be putting themselves in the conversation, at least for the next few years here. So not going to dominate the regular season, but I still think in this division, they're good enough to be at the very least third. And as a result, they'll be back in the playoffs. So I think everyone expected the top two in this division to probably be about the same as it was last season. You could argue that this team should be number one, but ultimately I'm going with the same seeding as last season. I got the Edmonton Oilers still in second, but I have them improving a bit from last year, 52, 24, and 6 for 110 points. They'll be back in the playoffs for sure, and definitely still a Stanley Cup contender. This is a team that just got to the Stanley Cup final, and given some of the additions that they made this offseason, you could argue that they improved their roster coming off going all the way to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, ultimately losing to the Florida Panthers, who I think everyone could agree that, they made a run. They nearly came back down 3-0 in that final, but I think the Panthers did deserve to win that cup. But the Oilers still have an elite offensive core and a team that definitely got significantly better this offseason. So I definitely think they're going to be more consistent than they were to start last season, because they were god-awful to start last season, and get themselves into being, a top 5 team in the NHL. I don't need to spend that much time in the forward group, but we all know it's pretty nasty. I mean, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl leading the way. 2 of the top 4 or 5 players in the NHL for sure. I mean, McDavid's the best guy in the league. Draisaitl definitely at the very least top 5. You can argue he's top 3 in the league. Zach Hyman coming off a over 50 goal season. I think he could still probably hover around 40. I don't know if he's going to hit 50 plus again, but on McDavid's wing, setting him up, he'll get his goals. Nugent Hopkins is just as solid as ever, one of the more underrated players in the league. And then the 2 big additions, Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson, each of which do have 30-plus goal potential when healthy. I think Skinner just had a couple rough years in Buffalo, but towards the end of his career there, he definitely was coming on and, kind of bouncing back and being back to what he was, for most of his years in Carolina, just being a reliable 25 to 35 goal scorer. And Victor Arvidsson, yes, he's had his injury troubles, but when healthy, very efficient guy. You can definitely count on him to get 50 to 60 points and around 25 to 30 goals. So I think especially with this Oilers team and improved offense surrounding them, those guys are going to get their numbers if they are healthy. Their bottom 6 looks fine. I think Adam Henrique, bringing him back, very good third-line center. Jan-Mark Brown, both huge in their run to the Stanley Cup Final, especially in that Stanley Cup Final series, were fantastic. So I like bringing those guys back. You bring back Corey Perry, take a flyer on a guy like Vasily Podkolzin, former lottery pick with the Vancouver Canucks. Maybe there's still some untapped potential there. They just couldn't, he couldn't reach with the Canucks roster, but maybe with Edmonton, he finds his game and, takes it to another gear and hopefully, gets himself to where he was supposed to be when he was drafted, but we'll see with him. But overall, the 4 groups, one of the best in the league. I think everybody knows that. On defense, there's some concerns there, especially after losing Philip Broberg via offer sheet to St. Louis and then trading Cody Ceci, who, was more of a third pair guy, but now your right side looks a little bit thin outside of Evan Bouchard, who can be one of the best offensive point producers, but Yeah, Troy Stetcher, Ty Emerson, those are fine on like third pair role, maybe even like a seventh D-man. So the right side definitely is a bit of a concern. I think they could use another body there, but like it's still, they can get by with it, I think, because of how prolific their offense is. But I definitely think the blue line is a bit concerning. But in the regular season, at least, I think they can get by. The left side is fine for me. Ekholm's amazing. Nurse has his struggles, but when he's on his game, he's a very solid top four guy. And Brett Kulak is fine on the third pair, and no complaints there. And then another key there is their goaltending. I don't really like it that much, but Stuart Skinner, he proved, in these past playoffs that he can be, or at the very least is capable of being a 1A goaltender, a starting caliber goaltender in the NHL. And I think still being only 24, 25 years old, you can argue that the best years are yet to come for him. So maybe he can take his game to another level, be really solid, more consistent throughout the season. Calvin Pickard, I think he's fine as a backup, but maybe add another goaltending body there just for insurance purposes. But overall, look, it's a solid team. We know what this team's capable of doing. They just made the finals this past season. They'll be in the running for a Stanley Cup, that's for sure. The Oilers team is still great, obviously. McDavid, I don't know if he's going to hit 100 assists again, but probably still going to be in the running for, the leading scorer, if not lead the league in scoring. Draisaitl, we know he's him. Bouchard's one of the best offensive blue liners. Plethora of offensive talent. One of the best offenses we have seen. The team overall is going to make some noise. They'll be back in the running for a Stanley Cup this upcoming season, but I only have them in second because in first, I still think that the Vancouver Canucks are going to win this division. I got them 52, 22, and 8 for 112 points. A lot of people believe that they overachieved slightly and maybe are going to regress. On the contrary, I actually believe that they are going to be better than they were last season. And a big reason why is their off season that they had. I think they added some very welcomed additions. And not only that, but their overall roster, I just feel like they're the most well-rounded team in this division, even more so than the Oilers. You could argue that the Oilers have the better offense, but given the additions they made, I even think that could be a little bit debatable, but I definitely think their defense is better. And especially in goal, I think they're significantly better than the Oilers. But now, in terms of who I believe the deepest forward group is in the NHL, I think it's the Dallas Stars. But when you look at this forward group right here, I think the Canucks are right there, man. Like, you're looking at Niels Höglander, for example. He's coming off north of 20 goals this past season. He's on the top line with JT Miller, who has 100-point potential. I mean, he had 100 points this past season. Brock Besser's a 40-goal scorer now. Fantastic top line. And then you have Elias Pettersson. Finally, you get him some good quality wingers, guys who can actually finish. And Jake DeBrusk, who was a bit inconsistent at times in Boston, but there was moments where he's shown that he could be much more than what he had been at that point of his career. And if he's playing with a guy like Elias Pettersson, with all due respect to the guys he had in Boston, I don't think he's ever going to be playing. He never played at any point with a guy as elite of talent as Elias Pettersson is. And Daniel Sprong on the other wing, who in a sheltered role, fourth line, whatever, playing with Seattle and then Detroit this past season, still efficient offensively. You're not going to get much from him on the defensive end, but in a top six role, he can give you way more than what he did in a fourth line role. He still gave you 40 points last year. With Pettersson and Jake DeBrusk, if he's playing in a top six, I could definitely envision him being a 25 to 30 goal and roughly 60-point guy. Like, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility whatsoever. And then because of those additions, you just get a lot deeper, up front with Connor Garland now on your third line, who's easily capable of 50 points year in and year out, and Dakota Joshua, who had 20 goals this past season. I don't know if he replicates that, but I feel like he could still hover around it. So just they're a lot deeper overall. And then their fourth line, Heinen on the fourth line, I think is solid. Suter, Sherwood, one of the better fourth lines. I feel like there's some offense to give there. So I think this offense could hang with pretty much anybody in the NHL. And I think, honestly, I'm a little bit more bullish on them than most people because, in my bold predictions video, I did say that Pettersson was going to lead the entire league in scoring. And I think I had him with like 130 points, which is absurd considering how bad he was down the stretch last season and in the playoffs. But I think just with the quality wingers he has, he's going to be involved in this offense tremendously. And just the team as a whole, I just think they're going to score a lot of goals. And I don't believe the offense that they put up last year was a fluke by any means. In fact, I think they're going to be a lot better. Just given the additions they have, I think they're just a much more lethal forward group, especially on their top nine. Then the blue line, I think of top pair Quinn Hughes and Filip Hronek to start with. It's one of the better top pairs in the league, both of which are fantastic. I mean, Quinn Hughes just won the Norris this past season, and I think he'll be in the running for it next year. And just given his production, like I had him doing pretty well this next season. He had over 90 points. I could easily see him get 90, 95 this year again. Like, he's just an elite offensive defenseman, one of the best in the NHL, no question. And then, the rest of the D is not the greatest, but I don't think it's that bad either, just given what they can do. Soucy, Myers, second pair is fine. Forward Desharnais, just added depth. Not the greatest blue line, but I think they can get by with it. I don't know if I would take it ahead of Edmonton's. I feel like it's kind of debatable, but these teams are very stacked very similarly. But ultimately, the reason why I gave them the edge is because of their goaltending. Thatcher Demko, when he's healthy, he's a top 5 goalie in the NHL. I mean, he proved it this past season. He had a fantastic year when he was healthy, but then when they needed him most, he got hurt and he was unavailable to play for them basically the entire playoffs. But with Arthur Shelovs, he proved to be a solid, serviceable option as their backup, and he took over as the starter in the playoffs. He played pretty well, to all things considered. Unfortunately, they did lose to the Oilers in 7 games in that second round, but I think he's capable of, getting the team by when needed. And I think there's reports that Demko might not even be ready to start a training camp or even the preseason. So that is a cause for concern. But I still think that with or without him, I still think that they can get by with Shelovs if he plays a little bit more games. And Demko, I don't expect him to miss the entire season. So I think at some point he will return, hopefully early on into the year, like at worst, like November or something. And I think the Canucks, their offense is good. I think overall the team is really solid. I think they can get by. So I still think this is a team that's, knocking on the door of being a contender in the Western Conference, truthfully. It's like I said, most well-rounded team in the division, in my opinion. They got a little bit of everything that they need. They got elite forwards, high-end talent, one of the best defensemen, if not the best defenseman in the league, Quinn Hughes right now, and a top goalie in the league if healthy. This team for sure, in my opinion, is a playoff lock, but because they haven't proven that they can go deep in the playoffs with this core, I didn't quite label them as a contender, but I definitely would label them as a contender. If they can prove it, they definitely have that potential to be a true Stanley Cup contender in the NHL. And if they're in the running for Stanley Cup, if they can get to a conference final, even a Stanley Cup final, to be honest with you, that would not surprise me. So with that is going to wrap up this video for my Pacific Division standings for the NHL 2024-2025 season. As always, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Give me your predictions in terms of your standings. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know all of that. I love when you guys engage in the comments, and I'm more than happy to debate or have subtle conversations. I don't mind. It's hockey. It's all subjective. These are my opinions. You guys are all entitled to yours. So, but yeah, honestly, it's going to be an exciting season. I can't wait for the season to start. And yeah, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for the more divisions coming up. I got the Central, Metro, and Atlantic coming up in later dates. Those predictions coming up soon. So again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. See ya.